Hey everyone, Brendan Snyder here. How are you? Thank you so much for joining me and welcome to Top 10 Albums with Bad Art, but Great Music. So we've all seen it. They're out there all over the place. If you're anything like me, physical collector who enjoys holding the album art in your hand while listening to the music, I find that really good art can emphasize and enhance the music. I love that. And of course, sometimes it can be the opposite of that, where bad art just makes it nowhere near as good. And so, while the art for these may be bad, and especially not knowing the full context of how or why it was created, the thing is, oftentimes there was concepts behind the creation of the art which, may have made sense at the time, but unfortunately, most people don't know what that is today, and so we're simply left with these iconic albums that have bad art. And they've got all kinds of things in them. We're going to cover 10 of them here. They've got cows, bathrooms, trash bags, butts, reclaimed art, and so much more, and we'll dive into that and break down 10 of these here. But before we get started, if you're new to my channel and you haven't already hit the subscribe button, please do. Also leave a comment, hit like, all those things help support my channel. I'd greatly appreciate it. And of course, as the added bonus, if you turn on notifications, you're going to stay up to date on really cool episodes just like this with top 10 albums with bad art, but great music. And so we're going to kick things off here, coming in at number 10, Pink Floyd, Atom Heart Mother from 1970. Fifth studio album. Let's just take a peek at this thing. As I said, there's going to be some on, in this countdown with cows, and this isn't the only one. We've got more coming. But fifth studio album, the cover was designed by Hypnosis, who's worked with Led Zeppelin, Rainbow, UFOs, who's done lots of great stuff. And, you wouldn't expect this to be art that came from him, certainly. But we basically just have a cow standing in pasture. And the thing is, the concept behind it is actually pretty cool. It's about the band's response to all of the space rock psychedelic imagery that was being associated with the band. And the band didn't want to get pigeonholed. They wanted to play all kinds of music and not be limited by that. So they put a cow standing in the pasture to completely go against everything else that was out there about their psychedelic space rock imagery that the media was applying to them. And so that's kind of cool. Of course, the music on here is really good, and they did explore a lot of different music on here. But the opening suite, Atom Heart Mother on here, is just iconic, and there's lots of other great music. So the album has stood up for the test of time, and certainly with the band being Pink Floyd, any of their albums are going to do that. But this is just always one that, until I really understood the idea behind it, just really left me scratching my head. All right, coming in at number 9, Rolling Stones, Beggar's Banquet from 1968. This was the 7th British album, but 9th in the US. They got off a little bit, and so a few extra albums released in the US, compiled and broken down in different ways. But ultimately, 9th album released in the US. This is the original art that was rejected by the label, and quite frankly, I can totally see why. It's not the most appealing thing here. When it was released, it simply was in a cream-colored sleeve that had the letters RSVP on it, and I guess that tied into the idea of the banquet and responding that you would attend, that sort of a thing. Kind of interesting and all. But this cover here was a photograph taken by Barry Feinstein, and it's simply just of a toilet, a bathroom with graffiti on the wall. Now, I will say I've always I have liked this, despite sort of the commentary or the idea of what it is, the just dirty, disgusting bathroom. But it is the way most rock club bathrooms look, so I always kind of took it to be that this is the place the band, plays and that sort of stuff, and it's kind of the behind the scenes and so forth. But never quite sure what, if anything, the photograph was meant to mean as far as for their album, or how it tied into the title of Beggar's Banquet. If you guys know that fuller, richer history, I would be interested in it. But this is what it is, and a lot of people, have just thought this is quite disgusting album cover, and certainly the record label did. But it's got amazing songs on it. It opens up with Sympathy for the Devil, one of the songs that has been covered by so many great bands, including Guns N' Roses. You've got other great songs that are on here as well. I've always really liked the song Factory Girl that's on this. But, for 1968, that was a pretty racy album cover. And again, it's from the Rolling Stones, and the Rolling Stones have gone on to do, huge, amazing things since then. So we're left with that as an iconic album that doesn't have the best art, but it still has some pretty great music on it. And so it just continues to thrive and thrive out there. Next up at number 8, Aerosmith, Get a Grip from 1993, their 11th studio album, and our second one with a cow on it. This one updated for the time, certainly. You can see that it's a cow. It's got the Aerosmith logo branded on it, and if you can see right there, the udder on the cow is pierced. And at the time when this came out, all of the animal rights activists and people went nuts, and I don't know why they would have thought that, oh yeah, Aerosmith really pierced a cow's udder to do this. Of course, it was later confirmed that it was just an altered image through a digital imagery to create that, but it still sent off a flurry of press about it and everything. And obviously the album cover is meant to be shocking, be a bit tongue-in-cheek, but for me at least, when this dropped in 1993, and I was, head over heels into Aerosmith at the time, I just remember thinking, I don't really want to stare at a cow's udder while listening to the music. And I had bought the limited edition one as well. So it's just the cowhide that's on here. And of course, when you open it up, you saw the rest of the art, and you can even see what they did on the inside of it there being the big zoomed in thing. But it just wasn't something that really screamed home to me about the music and everything. But that tongue-in-cheek idea to get a grip, get a hold of yourself, but at the same time, grab the cow's udder, that sort of a thing. So it all made sense, and it was actually created by Hugh Sim, who's worked with Rush, Bon Jovi, Great White. So lots of cool art created by this guy, and I was again shocked to find out that he was the one that did this, sort of the same way that we had Hypnosis, who did the one for Pink Floyd. Okay, moving on to number 7, Bruce Springsteen, Born in the USA, came out in 1984, his 7th studio album. And I don't know how much, idea was put into this. I'm going to speculate on a little bit of this, but we basically have Bruce in a pair of jeans and t-shirt standing in front of an American flag. Obviously the title being Born in the USA, that makes sense. Bruce has always championed the blue-collar worker, so we've got the guy in a pair of blue jeans and a t-shirt, looking like he just worked a farm or something like that. But at the same time, this was 1984. Bruce was very big and very popular. And, what better thing to help sell a few extra albums to the ladies than to put Bruce's butt on an album. So unfortunately, I've always seen it as that. I'm always like, I don't really want to stare at Bruce Springsteen's butt. I'd rather stare at something else, a bit more meaningful. And so I just always felt that this was not very good album art. Although, as big as the album became, this is a super iconic album cover now. And of course it has the songs to support it on here. Not just the song Born in the USA, but Glory Days and Cover Me and My Hometown. And we could go on and on with the songs that are on this thing that are so good. Dancing in the Dark, I didn't want to miss that one that's on here. But huge album that really, in a lot of cases, the music on these albums really by far exceeded the album art that was part of these. But because the music and the albums became so big, the art itself did as well. Despite whether good or bad, it became just as iconic as the music did. Case in point with this next one here, coming in at number 6, Bon Jovi, Slippery When Wet from 1986, their 3rd studio album. And so this is not the original album cover that the band set out to use. You've probably seen it on Japanese editions. It was a girl in a wet t-shirt, and it had hot pink, border around it and stuff like that. And it was a bright kind of neon yellow t-shirt. And while, it might have helped them at the time because, who wouldn't rather stare at a girl in a wet t-shirt? but I don't think it would have aged as well. So where the record label stepped in and rejected it because they didn't think it would get sold in big box stores, you know, the Kmart's, Walmart's, and things like that, you know, different retailers might have rejected it. They went with this, and this was a last minute thing. They couldn't really figure out what to do, and they were going for this idea to try to represent Slippery When Wet and how to do it. And ultimately, in the end of the day, it's just a trash bag where they spritzed water on it and scribbled on it "Slippery When Wet." And no one in the band actually liked this at all, but they were under a deadline. They went with it. And of course, now it's this huge iconic thing. In the end of the day, I do think that this cover has held up a lot better than if we had had a Girl in a Wet t-shirt. It would be interesting though, because the music on here, would the music have surpassed that? Maybe the music never would have gotten past the representation of what the album art was had it been that. So you'll never know at this point. But of course, we've got You Give Love a Bad Name and Living on a Prayer on this. One of my personal favorites, which doesn't really get played a lot more in concert, the ballad Never Say Goodbye is on here. And of course, we have Wanted Dead or Alive. But some of the most iconic songs in all of 80s rock appear on this album cover, which is nothing more than a trash bag with spritzed water on it. So go figure. Okay, coming in at number 5, we've actually got a twofer happening here. Guns N' Roses and the 2 Use Your Illusion album covers. And I'm going to put one of them down so I can actually hold this one up here and talk a bit about it. But coming out in 1991, they dropped both albums. And so what do we really have here? This being their 3rd and 4th album respectively, it is a cover that is based on Raphael's School of Athens. Raphael being, you know, an Italian artist from way back, I don't know the year. But this art here, which had the artist pulling out certain details of the original art, was created by Paul Kostabi. And I went back and I've looked at the original art versus this, and there's really not a lot different in it. I'm not even sure how that person can apply their name to it. But when they did what they did here, pulling out certain details, emphasizing some, pulling back on others, this artist titled it as Use Your Illusion. Of course, that's where the album gets its name. And this was all handled and selected by Axl Rose, and never really gotten any information out of him directly as to what this was intended to mean or why he was so into it. But ultimately, this is what the band went with. And for 2 albums that were known, I mean, we knew these were going to be huge when they dropped. So this wasn't anything that they put out not expecting much and then the albums exploded. This is, you went with this kind of weird art based on some historical art that's not really the art that the artist created. So reclaimed art is what I was titling it as. What I found to be interesting about this is that there's a much bigger image of this by Raphael, but people like this are philosophers, famous philosophers who have all been identified throughout time. But this person here, the one that is scribing, writing, has never had a name or an identity associated with that person. And so it's weird to whether this is just a person or a figure lost to time, or whether or not it is meant to be an unknown person. Now, whether or not that ties into any of the music that's on here or the idea, the representation of this person being an unknown amongst all of the known, who knows? Again, it's probably lost to time at this point because Axl is not known for getting out there and really talking to us about all those sort of things. But the music that's on here, of course, as I said, from both of these albums, you know, elevated all of this, but I just never felt that this was that great of art that warranted what we were about to get from these, having, you know, songs that had already been released like Civil War, Knocking on Heaven's Door, first single You Could Be Mine, Don't Cry, November's Rain, Estranged, all that sort of stuff, and then to just use some reclaimed art that was sort of, you know, bastardized by somebody else, to me leaves a lot to be desired in terms of what it could have been. Coming in at number 4, Metallica, the Black Album from 1991, their 5th studio album. And as you can see where the album gets its name, because it's really the self-titled album, but it's basically all black. And it's a little hard to see here, so I'm going to take the cover out of the jewel case. Try and get it a little bit more visual for you. So you can see that the band has the logo up here, and then they've got this snake that's down here. The snake itself is also on the back side of it. And so the snake itself was actually taken from the Gantz flag, which the motto of the Gantz flag is "Don't Tread on Me." So I found that to be interesting, being one of the songs on the album itself is "Don't Tread on Me." And I think it would have been cool had the album taken on that name as opposed to the Black Album, but it does just go to show you that the simplest, most direct thing can oftentimes take over, regardless of maybe what you want it to be. And with this thing just being all black, and Metallica being the band that did this here, of course, that was simply going to become known as the Black Album. Maybe more fitting to them than anyone else that has done this, because at the time I have to say that there's other albums that had notably been done this way that I started to feel this was a bit tired and unoriginal, where we had Status Quo in the album Hello in 1973. Of course, AC/DC did it with Back in Black in 1980. Spinal Tap and their mockumentary movie and their supposed album Smell the Glove, but also the soundtrack itself from 1984. So multiple albums like this had been out there amongst the music consciousness, and for Metallica to do this, as I said, I just felt was a bit unoriginal. And again, when I want to stare at something and look at something and devour everything by my favorite band, there was just really nothing to get into in terms of listening to the music. So I always kind of, or that in and of itself always kind of bummed me out. Now, we just talked about AC/DC, so we're going to talk about them here at number 3. Back in Black, 1980 release, 7th studio album, of course featuring Brian Johnson coming in, taking over for Bon Scott, who had unfortunately passed away. And this one here, in my opinion, done a little bit better than Metallica did, where this is really meant to be a tribute to Bon Scott. And it represents the band in mourning, or at least that's how I always took it. I did try to do a little research on it, and I didn't find anything specifically saying that, although I think that was really the intent. You wear black when you're in mourning, you're going to a funeral. So the Black Album cover, Back in Black, but you get a little bit more, and that's where I think AC/DC did it better than, say, Metallica did, because they used the white writing to stand out on this, and it was still a little unique at that time. But the album had become so big and so famous by the time Metallica did it, I sort of, why would they be choosing to do the same thing? And it's not the first time that Metallica has used album art that has been used by others as well. So now it actually, really leads me to question the whole thing and why they do some of what they do. But of course, this album, one of the most iconic of all, one of the biggest selling rock albums ever. I think there's 40 million copies sold in the US alone on this, something like 60 million worldwide. Hell's Bells, Back in Black, You Shook Me All Night Long, but really every song on this thing is so good from start to finish. There's not a bad one on here. So the music itself certainly rose above the simplistic nature of the album art, but then again, it could have been that simplistic nature, which is actually what pushed it ahead. Coming in at number 2, Black Sabbath, self-titled release from 1970, their debut studio album, which the cover is just so very English, in my opinion. Now, of course, they're an English band, so, why not? I get that. But it really kind of ties it to a period and a time, and in my opinion, has not really carried the album through. It is not album art that has maintained a sort of modern feel to it or part of the present culture and so forth. So I don't know if the album art worked the way they wanted to, but then again, this was the band's first album. They had no idea what was going to happen either yet. And so the cover itself was shot at Maple Durham Watermill, and that's along the River Thames in Oxfordshire, England. And the woman, and I didn't even know that was a woman for a long time, but in the black cloak there, up until 2020, I was very little people are very unwidely known as to who this person was. And ultimately it was determined or confirmed that it was Louisa Livingstone. That was kind of an interesting thing during the pandemic to find out, as most documentaries and reports said that it had been lost to time who the figure was on the album cover. But it has since been tracked down. And so the thing is, it's just, in my opinion, not very interesting of an image to be looking at while listening to music. But the artist that shot this did attempt to try different things. In fact, it was later found out that she's not wearing anything under the cloak, and they tried some more risque shots, but that they felt that any kind of sexuality that was shown actually took away from the foreboding nature of the image itself. And I would really agree with that. While I would rather see a naked lady than stare at this thing, if that had been the cover with Black Sabbath, it really would not have brought that across. So this is a case in point where understanding the context of what they were going for, that foreboding nature, and the other alternatives that they were trying to do with this to make it have some more lively appearance ultimately as to why they didn't do it, I think makes total sense. And of course, the album itself contains the title track, which is also the name of the band Black Sabbath, but that song on here has become one of the most iconic metal songs, and this being literally considered the first heavy metal album. Black Sabbath, the creators of heavy metal. Yes, there were proto-metal bands that came before them, but the real start, the real first heavy metal album being this one here. And so for your first album and your art that you had no idea that was going to go on and be delineated as that, this is what you get. All right, and the number one iconic album that in my opinion has bad album art, but of course the music is so great, goes to Led Zeppelin 4, or self-titled or untitled. I mean, there's so many ways that people have referred to this album. Came out in 1971 and was the fourth studio album from the band. People also referred to it by the logos that each of the band members used, and Jimmy Page's, which was Zozo. So you got all kinds of different things, but call it what you want. It's their fourth album. This was interesting in that it features a painting on here that's a 19th century rustic oil painting that was purchased by Robert Plant in an antique store, and then it was hung on a partially demolished wall of a suburban house. And I really had to look into finding what that information was. And again, very English in my opinion. So again, it sort of really sets it in a place in time. Has both, good things for doing that and otherwise bad things for that, because it is such an iconic album now. But what they were going for was a dichotomy between city and country, city, the hustle and bustle of things, and then the country, fields of grass and whatever sort of a thing. And I think also meant to be between the rock sound of the band and its more country folk elements as well. There was also meant to be a reminder to look after the earth. And all of those things very interesting, but none of it really reads through, in my opinion, in this, and not something that without doing a lot of research on it would I really understand, or would somebody really pick up on, in my opinion. So it just became, a piece of art that when I found this album in the very late 80s, early 90s, because somebody was telling me about Stairway to Heaven, I had to check that song out. Of course, one of the most iconic rock songs ever. I go and I get this thing, I think, what is this? This doesn't look like anything I'm going to want to listen to. And yet, of course, it becomes the great, amazing album that we all know and love today. But the album art doesn't scream that. And I think this one here is a classic, perfect case where the album art doesn't speak to the quality of the music. And that's what a lot of these are. The albums were so much better, the music was so much better than what the art itself originally suggested you might be getting with it. And back in a day, before the internet, before we could listen to things, where a lot of times you were buying an album based on its art. You might have heard a song, but if that art didn't grab you, maybe you didn't pick it up. And I know I bought a lot of albums that way back in the late 80s. So seeing something like this, I would have passed it over if it wasn't for all the people talking about it. And I think the same could be said for all 10 of these that we've talked about here today. But there you go. There are 10 iconic albums with bad art but great music. As we all know, I'm sure you guys know a bunch of other ones that are out there. These were just the 10 that came to mind for me and the ones that I think are some of the most iconic ones that are out there. So certainly leave your thoughts. Let me know the ones you agree with or disagree with, or the ones that you would have put in your list versus me. And otherwise, have a great day. Take care, and I will talk to you soon. Bye-bye, everyone.